And some of what I'll talk about today will be stuff we've already talked about. Some of it will be different or more information. So here's the question I want us to answer. Can we be sure that Jesus rose from the dead? When I was in my freshman religion class at St. Olaf, my Stansel, Dr. Stansel, I couldn't remember his name last time. Oh, he's probably dead. Whatever. He of the resurrection, he said that that it was a spiritual resurrection. It wasn't a bodily resurrection. And he put it this way: if you had been at the tomb that day, you wouldn't have seen him rise from the dead. It was spiritual, not a bodily resurrection. So, and that's not what the Bible teaches, right? That's what he taught. The story is in all four Gospels, um, and I just want to talk a little bit about there are discrepancies between those four Gospels, but I want to talk to you about why that doesn't discredit the account, because it proves there was no collusion among the writers. They're all independent accounts that say the same thing, the same basic story. And the things that are not exactly the same are secondary differences, minor differences. And that's not a problem for historians. In fact, it makes it more believable. The primary facts are all the same. Nobody says, for example, the disciples rushed the tomb and overpowered the guards and stole Jesus' body. That's not there, or anything like it. So we're going to read a big part of this passage, and then we'll move forward. Was it there?
It disappeared.
Oh, there it is. Oh, no. Oh. Okay. Was that my fault? What did I do? All right. No, I oh, I'm close.
That'll be your kid. You need a new mouth.
From current slide.
Oh.
Yeah. Ask for candy after last. I'll give it to you. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to read this passage to you, if it will work. There we go. Now, at the feast, the governor, that was Pilate, was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two of you do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, Jesus' mother, were there sitting opposite the tomb. The next day, that is, after the day of preparation for the Passover, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore, order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people he is risen from the dead, and the last fraud will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go make it as secure as you can." So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard. Now, after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake. For an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. They fainted. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen. As he said, come and see the place where he lay." While they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, "Tell people his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day, and to this day as well. Did Jesus really rise? It's many have become Christians trying to disprove the resurrection. That was C.S. Lewis's testimony. He wanted to discredit Christianity, and he became a Christian. Josh McDowell is another one. He wrote Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Frank Morrison, who rolled away the stone. And as you know from last year, Lee Strobel had that story too. He was trying to discredit it. So why have people tried to discredit the resurrection of Jesus throughout the millennia? I'll take that. There are several reasons why they would want to discredit. First of all, it's physically impossible. So that means it has to be something that's a miracle, and they don't want to believe that. But I don't think that creates a problem for them, but I think there's something else. Because if Jesus rose, people have to deal with the question of who he is. Because ordinary mortals don't do that. And so who is this Jesus that rose from the dead? Pilate said, "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called Christ?" I think that is perhaps the most important question in all of history. What am I going to do with Jesus who is called Christ? Now, can the resurrection be proven? People say they don't believe in the resurrection because it can't be scientifically proven, and they're right. It can't be scientifically proven. But proving something scientifically is different than historical. Finding out what happened in history. So you've got empirical science for science, but you've got forensic science for proof of the historical. That's how we know things happened in the past, is through forensic proof. So nothing in history can be scientifically proven. We can't prove that that anything whatever you did in your last hour class, we can't prove that by science, but we can prove it other ways. So let's take this. And by the way, forensic proof is the basis of our court system. So let's say we tried to. Let's say you go home today, and you talk to your parents. They ask what happened, and you say that to your parents that Mrs. Keyser gave the greatest lecture in Bible that has ever been given, and your dad or mom says, "Prove it." So how could you prove that? Maybe I got you to lie. Hey, go home and tell your parents that I just gave a great lecture. Or maybe I hypnotized you, and you're just telling them that because you're hypnotized. But maybe it was someone else. Maybe it wasn't me. Who knows? But historical proof is based on what is probable, not what is possible. It's possible I told a lie. It's possible it was someone else. It's possible this wasn't the greatest lecture in all of history. But historians find out what happened in the past based on evidence. And so you could bring an eyewitness in and say, Keyser really did give this lecture. Or you could take a picture of my lesson plan book that tells that I'm going to do this lecture. You could take your lecture notes home and say, look, this is what I learned today. And historians do the same thing. They use eyewitness first-hand accounts called source documents. And that's the best kind of evidence, are the ones that are from eyewitnesses. So how does the historical proof for the resurrection stack up against other things in ancient history? Well, we have 4 source documents in the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they were all written not long after the events. In fact, the earliest one might be in the late 30s or the early 40s, not very long at all. The latest would have been John, that wrote in somewhere in the 80s and the 90s. But I can remember 50 years ago. I know you can't, but I can remember. I was 13 years old, right? So that's not really very long, especially when we look at all of history. That's not a very long time. So we have 4 source documents of the gospel, written not long after. And then we have the Gospels that are eyewitness, not legend, as some say. And all of them were written either by eyewitnesses or people who were informed by eyewitnesses. That's true of the Gospels, for sure. And anyone who says that they're not early enough or anything like that has an agenda that makes that belief necessary, because they are very close to the time that it happened. And then we also have a creed in 1 Corinthians 15. And this is the earliest statement of belief in the church. This is the first that we have. It is likely the first statement of belief in the church. So this is what it says. For I delivered to you, so this is Paul writing, for I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, Peter, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Then last of all, it's not there. He said he appeared to me as one to untimely born. So we've got this statement, statement of faith about Jesus very early in the church, and I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know that Paul wrote it, but it was written very, very, very early. So it's the earliest statement, and it was possibly taught to Paul by Peter or James. So to say that we can't scientifically prove the resurrection doesn't weaken the argument for the resurrection. It just puts it in the realm of reality with all other historical events. So can we historically prove, using forensic evidence, the resurrection? Well, we have 4 eyewitness accounts plus 1 early creed. And that is probably more source documents than any other ancient event. Historians write historical accounts based on little pieces of fragments of things, and then they try and piece it together and say what it said. We have way more source documents than anything else in ancient history. But why is it that only Jesus and his resurrection aren't believed? This is a quote from think of our Supreme Court. He was the highest judge at the time in England, in their highest court. And he was a believer, and he said this: "To me, the evidence is conclusive, and over again on the High Court, I have secured a verdict on evidence not so nearly so compelling. As a lawyer, I accept the gospel evidence unreservedly as the testimony of truthful men to facts that they were able to substantiate." So it weathers the test of the trial. Yeah. I said that. So over time, though, people have posited different ideas or different theories on what happened to Jesus, right? And let's talk about some of those theories that people believe. What's not in dispute is that everyone agrees that something happened to Jesus' body because it was buried. It isn't buried anywhere now, and it hasn't been since 3 days after his crucifixion. Not even his opponents denied his body was missing. Nobody ever said he's still in the tomb. So the question has always been, what happened to the body? So I call this first one. The first one is he wasn't really dead. I call this, they call it the swoon theory, but I call it the Princess Bride theory. Yes. He was just mostly dead. He was not all dead. And there were many eyewitnesses, and none claimed that. And then we've got medical evidence. Jesus was already in critical condition before he got to the cross. He was in hypovolemic shock. That means he had lost a lot of blood, and you saw that video of the scourging. He would have lost a lot of blood. And low blood volume would have caused erratic heartbeat, fainting, or collapse and thirst. And we see that on the cross. It also would have caused a collection of fluid around the heart and lungs, the white blood cells and the red blood cells would have separated. And when they pierced him, they saw blood and water. That's what it looked like, but it was the separating of the two types of blood cells. And even if he had survived the crucifixion, he could not have survived the thrust of the sword through the heart and lungs. So the Romans declared him dead, and they knew how to do that. And they were trained killers, so they knew what to look for. And I wonder if this is. I'm not gonna do it yet. So the Romans in Mark 15 we see declared him dead. And then here's the clincher. He was beaten, tortured, crucified, and stabbed so badly that Scripture tells us he was unrecognizable as a man. Then he was mummified and laid in a tomb with a huge rock in front of it that could not be moved from inside. How then could he have recovered without any medical assistance, taking off the wrap, removed the stone, and walked out of the tomb apart from divine intervention? It's not even possible. Let it alone, probably. And then the next one is Joseph never buried him. Now, we have from Scripture that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, which is Jesus' mother, were there. They saw it. And in 3 gospel accounts, it tells us that. And they later went back to the tomb. If he had never been buried, why would they go back if Joseph did not bury him? And clearly they expected Jesus to be in the tomb. And if the religious leaders were so concerned about his body being stolen, surely they checked, made sure he was in there. But why would Joseph do it? Not even the disciples. His closest. The other one is Joseph never buried him. But why would Joseph do it? Not even his disciples expected him to rise, even though he said he would. They were shocked. So how would Joseph know to fake the resurrection? And then that his disciples stole the body. I love this one. I call this one, you probably don't know this movie, and it's not a very good movie. I've never seen it. I just saw trailers. Your parents probably know about it. Maybe your grandparents. The Weekend at Bernie's Theory. It's a movie about 2 young guys that were kind of ne'er-do-wells who got hired by a very wealthy man, and he invites them to his beach house on Malibu Beach, and they get there and he's dead. So instead of missing out on their fun weekend, they just take Bernie with them everywhere they go, and he goes water skiing. He goes all these things. So that's why I call it the Weekend at Bernie's Theory. Fishermen getting past Roman guards, really? And Pilate said, "Make it as secure as you know how." And if they said that the guards fell asleep, the penalty for that was death. They wouldn't do that, and they had 2 separate groups. So one would sleep and one would be on guard. Why they all of them were sleeping? That doesn't make sense. And then carrying the body through the streets of Jerusalem, and nobody noticed these guys carrying this dead guy through Jerusalem. Listen, after Jesus died, these guys were wimps. When he appeared to them, they were cowering in the upper room. They not only did they not know to fake one, they didn't have the guts to fake one. They other than John, they all deserted him before the cross. Only John was at the foot of the cross. So I don't think they would have risked being killed at this point. And they didn't even know to steal the body. I don't think I have that up there. Yeah. Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. So they didn't understand. And he's admitting that he didn't understand. They were clueless. So I'm going to stop with a story about my mom. Late in my mom's life, she was diagnosed with macular degeneration. It's an eye disease that causes especially your I think central vision to go away. And she was going blind basically. And so she was sent to a special doctor. Now I got to tell you, my mother was the most positive human being I have ever known. She was so crazy positive. Sometimes I was just like, who is this woman? And so I took her to all her medical appointments. And I lived 2 houses away and across the street. And so I took her, but before we went to the doctor, my sister said, "Oh yeah, I went to that doctor in high school, and he's really good looking." So we're like, "Okay, he's good looking." So we get there where she's in the chair, I'm sitting in a chair where I can see down the hallway, and there's this guy down there, and I know he's a doctor, and I'm like, surely that's not him, because he was about this tall. He was probably, I don't know if he was even as tall as I was. He had gray hair. I mean, it had been a long time, right? But he was also balding quite profusely, and what hair he had was long, and he had it back in a ponytail, and he had these thick glasses. So I'm looking down the thing, and I'm like, that can't be the guy. It's not him. And he comes in, and he's talking to my mother. And he's saying things that were very disturbing. Things like, you're going to lose your vision, and there's not much we can do, but we can do this, and we can slow it down, and all these things. And she's just looking at him going, yes, yes, okay, I understand. Yes, thank you, doctor. Yes. She's just like, oh, and I know what's going on in that brain of hers. She's going, if he's 20 years young, and he had hair, and it wasn't, could he be good looking? Maybe he could be. No, it wasn't. It wasn't the guy. It was his brother that my sister went to see. She was just clueless on the whole thing, and that was not the only time that she was clueless. She was the most loving and positive human ever. The disciples were clueless. They didn't know. They were just hiding. They were afraid. So they wouldn't have. I don't think they would have done that. And then they didn't understand Jesus' teaching that he would rise from the dead. Their complete surprise at his resurrection proves that. And even if they could have pulled it off, they didn't know they should try to fake a resurrection, right? So they were clueless. Okay, we're done with that. We'll pick up here tomorrow, and we'll